Everyone mocked the obese bride until Mountain Man said, "She's built for me." "Look at her," Clyde Jennings slurred, staggering down the church aisle with whiskey still hot on his breath. "The fattest bride in the West. I'd rather marry a sow than that woman." His words cracked across the hushed sanctuary like a whip, followed by cruel laughter that rose from the pews. Leah Mae Dawson stood frozen at the altar, her bouquet of wild daisies trembling in her hands. She had stitched her own wedding gown, pouring weeks of care into every seam, dreaming it would hide the weight she carried on her frame. Instead, it now clung to her like a cruel spotlight, exposing her to ridicule before the very people she had sewn clothes for, prayed with, and served in quiet humility. Her mother's eyes were filled with pity, her neighbors with scorn. The man she was to marry had not only abandoned her, but shredded her dignity in front of them all. The daisies slipped from her grip, scattering petals across the wooden floor. She fought to breathe, fought not to collapse beneath the weight of humiliation heavier than her body had ever been. Then came a sound, a voice as deep and steady as the mountains themselves. "Enough." Heads turned as the church doors creaked open. A massive figure filled the frame, a man with broad shoulders, a scar that split his cheek, and eyes that carried storms. Michael Bear McKenna, the feared mountain man who rarely descended from Thunder Valley, stepped forward. He faced Clyde without flinching, then turned to Leah, his words echoing with conviction that silenced the room. "She's built for me," he said, "strong enough for my mountains, kind enough for my heart." The laughter died. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Leah Mae Dawson had never been the kind of woman men chased after in the dusty town of Dry Creek. She was 26, plain to some, too much woman to others, broad-hipped, round-faced, with arms and shoulders strengthened by years at her sewing table. But those who came to her for finely stitched coats and wedding gowns often forgot she was a woman with dreams of her own. They praised her hands, not her heart. Growing up, Leah had endured whispers and taunts. Children in the schoolyard called her Heavy Leah. Later, townsfolk murmured about how no man would ever want a wife built like that. Yet beneath her layers of fabric and fortitude was a soul tender as spring rain, one that longed for belonging, companionship, and respect. That was why, when Clyde Jennings courted her with slick words and promises of a good life, she dared to hope. He was no saint, but he was steady on his feet back then, and he seemed willing to overlook her body in exchange for her skill and kindness. She thought, just maybe, he saw her. She spent nights hemming her own wedding dress, each stitch a prayer for a future she had been told she would never have. But Clyde showed his true face at the altar. He staggered in, drunk, mocking her in front of every soul in Dry Creek. "Marry her? Not I. I'd sooner wed a cow." The words landed like stones hurled at her chest. The crowd roared with laughter, their voices overlapping until they became a tide of cruelty that threatened to sweep her under. Leah's cheeks burned, her throat tightened. She felt small, exposed, like prey surrounded by circling wolves. The bouquet of daisies tumbled from her hands. For a fleeting moment, she wished the floorboards would open and swallow her whole. And then the doors swung wide. Michael Bear McKenna entered, a man most only whispered about. He was a mountain of flesh and bone, scarred from battles against man and beast. Some said he had killed with his bare hands. Others swore he lived with wolves. His presence pulled the air taut, silencing the cruel laughter. Bear's gaze swept the room, finally resting on Laya. What he saw was not a spectacle, not a figure of ridicule, but a woman wronged, a heart crushed under merciless scorn. His voice was low but carried like thunder. "She's built for me," he declared, "strong enough for the mountains I call home, gentle enough for the storms in my soul." The words stunned the congregation. The same people who had mocked now shifted uncomfortably in their pews. Even Clyde stumbled back, sobered by the weight of Bear's defiance. For the first time in her life, someone had spoken not about her weight, but about her worth. The sun had not yet risen when Michael Bear McKenna knocked at the door of the small boarding house where Leah had sought refuge after the disastrous wedding day. She opened it cautiously, eyes still swollen from tears, expecting more whispers or pity. Instead, she found the towering mountain man with his hat in his hands, his scarred face softened by a solemn respect. "I meant what I said," he told her simply. "The mountains are no place for liars or cowards. I'll not let your worth be decided by drunken fools." She hesitated, her heart pounding. To follow him meant stepping into the unknown, leaving behind the town that had mocked her, yet was all she had ever known. But staying meant more ridicule, more reminders of humiliation. With trembling resolve, she nodded. "I'll go." By mid-morning, they set off in his wagon, the road to Thunder Valley stretching long and winding through wild country. The horses strained against the weight, hooves striking sparks from the rocky trail. Leah clutched her small satchel. Her only possessions were needles, threads, and a folded quilt. She had never traveled farther than the county line. The higher they climbed, the sharper the wind cut across her cheeks. The wagon wheels splashed through shallow creeks and creaked over frozen ridges. At times, the path narrowed so tightly that Leah had to look away, fearing they might tumble into the abyss. Yet Bear's steady hands on the reins never faltered. "Are you cold?" he asked once, glancing at her shivering form. Without waiting for her answer, he pulled a thick buffalo hide from behind the seat and draped it across her shoulders. The warmth seeped into her bones, and for the first time since the church, she felt safe. At dusk, they stopped by a riverbank where spruce trees bowed low under snow. Bear built a fire with practiced ease, sparks crackling against the darkening sky. He handed her a tin cup of broth, the steam curling upward like a blessing. "You've lived through shame," he said quietly as they ate. "But shame is a lie men tell to keep others small. Up there," he pointed toward the looming peaks, "a woman's strength matters more than her shape. Can you work hard? Can you endure storms? That's what the mountains demand." Leah looked into the flames, the reflection of her rounded face shimmering in the copper pot. For years, she had believed she was too much, not enough, always the wrong shape. Yet here was a man who saw possibility where others saw ridicule. She swallowed the broth and whispered, "I can try." The journey pressed on. Nights brought howls of wolves and the groan of trees bending under snow. Leah slept wrapped in the buffalo hide, the fire's glow casting Bear's silhouette large and steady against the rocks. By day, he showed her how to spot deer tracks, how to collect kindling that would burn even when wet, how to listen to the silence between the wind gusts. Each small lesson chipped away at the voice of shame inside her. With every mile, she felt less like a discarded bride and more like a woman stepping into her own life. On the fourth evening, as they crested the last ridge, Thunder Valley opened before them, a sweep of pine forest cradling a frozen lake, with Bear's cabin crouched at the edge like a sentinel. Smoke curled from its chimney, and for the first time since the daisy slipped from her hand in the church, Leah felt the faint stirrings of hope. "This is home," Bear said, guiding the horses down the slope. His voice was quiet, but his eyes held something steady and certain. "And if you'll have it, it's yours too." The first morning in Thunder Valley dawned crisp and pale, the sky painted in strokes of lavender. Leah awoke to the creak of timbers and the smell of wood smoke. The cabin was small, just one main room with a loft above, a stone hearth dominating the far wall, and a single rough-hewn table with 2 stools. It was no parlor with lace curtains or polished floors, yet it breathed a kind of strength and shelter she had never known. Bear was already outside, chopping wood. Each swing of his axe cracked the silence, sending chips flying. Leah lingered by the doorway, watching. There was no mockery in his movements, no impatience, just rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. When he noticed her, he paused, wiped his brow, and said, "Breakfast is yours if you want it. Pan and flour are by the stove." The words were simple, but they carried weight. He trusted her with the hearth as though she belonged here. Nervously, she set about mixing batter, her hands clumsy at first. She was used to needles and cloth, not cast iron and open flame. When the cakes came out uneven, she bit her lip, expecting him to scowl. Instead, he ate the first one with a nod and said, "Best I've had in years." That evening, he dragged out a bundle of hides and began stitching them together with rawhide. Leah sat across from him, mending a torn quilt she had carried from town. For hours, the only sounds were the crackle of fire and the soft pull of thread. When she pricked her finger and hissed, he looked up sharply. "You all right?" She nodded quickly, surprised by his concern. Days unfolded in a rhythm of work. Bear showed her how to split kindling without splintering it, how to stack logs so they dried instead of rotting. He demonstrated how to haul water from the stream, setting down the heavy buckets and letting her try. Her arms trembled, but he didn't laugh. "Strength comes with use," he said. "You've got more grit than you think." He even built her a stool by the hearth, smoothing the edges so she could sit comfortably while sewing. "No wife of mine should hunch on the floor," he muttered almost shyly. The phrase, "wife of mine," sent a warmth through her that the fire could not rival. Nights were hardest. The mountain winds screamed like ghosts around the cabin walls, and sometimes snow blew in under the eaves. Leah lay awake, listening, fear gnawing at her chest. One night she crept from her bed to find Bear adding logs to the fire. He glanced up, his scarred face soft in the glow. "Storm won't take us," he said gently. "You're safe here." Those 3 words wrapped around her more tightly than any quilt. It was not only Bear who changed her. Nia, the Ute widow from the far side of the valley, arrived one afternoon with a basket of herbs. Her dark eyes studied Leah without judgment. "You are strong?" she said matter-of-factly, pressing the basket into her hands. "Strong women keep homes alive." From then on, Nia visited often, teaching her which plants eased fevers, which roots made broth rich, and how to piece fabric into patterns that told stories. With each passing week, Leah's hands grew more certain, her back straighter. She no longer flinched at her reflection in the tin wash basin. She saw not just a body mocked in church pews, but a woman who could haul water, stoke fires, cook for two, and mend a home against the winter. One evening, as the firelight flickered, Bear handed her a small wooden box. Inside lay a hair comb carved from bone, its edges rough but carefully smoothed. "Made it years ago," he admitted. "Never had reason to give it till now." Her throat tightened. She slid the comb into her hair, her fingers trembling. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He studied her quietly, then looked away, his voice low. "So are you." The words, awkward and unpolished, carried more truth than any honeyed compliment she had ever received. For the first time in her life, Leah felt not only seen, but cherished. Winter had barely loosened its grip when the first sign of trouble arrived. Leah spotted survey stakes driven into the frozen ground near their stream, bright red cloth flapping in the wind. At first she thought it was hunters marking trails, but Bear's jaw tightened the moment he saw them. "Railroad," he muttered, yanking a stake from the earth. "They've been sniffing around Thunder Valley for years. Thought the snows would keep them out." He tossed the stake into the firewood pile like it was kindling. "This land isn't theirs." The next Sunday they made the long ride into town. Leah hoped the church service might restore some sense of peace. She wore the quilted shawl Nia had helped her stitch, a token of pride in her new life. But the sanctuary buzzed with whispers the moment they entered. The townsfolk still hadn't forgotten the scene at her ruined wedding, and now they murmured about her hasty marriage to the scarred mountain man. After the sermon, Reverend Clark cleared his throat and, in a voice too loud to be accidental, declared, "The union of Leah Dawson and Michael McKenna cannot be recognized as lawful. The papers were filed improperly, and without sanction, their claim to land cannot stand." A stunned silence fell, then scattered chuckles. Leah felt heat crawl up her neck, but Bear simply placed his hand at the small of her back and guided her toward the door. Outside, she whispered fiercely, "Why didn't you speak up?" He looked down at her, eyes dark but steady. "Because we'll speak where it matters, before a judge, not a flock of gossips." Still, the humiliation stung. She remembered Clyde's laughter, the snide remarks about her body, and now this, the church branding her love a sham. It was as though the whole world conspired to strip her of dignity. Yet Bear's quiet resolve steadied her. The blow that followed came harder. That evening, Nia arrived breathless. "Men from the railroad," she said. "They've been at the edge of your land, said they'll drive you out before summer." And indeed, within days, a group of rough men appeared, company surveyors backed by hired guns. They cackled at the sagging roof, the patched fences, and at Leah herself. "A fat bride and her beast," one sneered. "Won't be long before the company takes what it's owed." Bear stepped forward, towering over them. "This land was claimed fair under homestead law. You've no right here." The leader, a man named Jerome Willis, waved a paper in his face. "According to this, the company does. You got no marriage license worth the ink it's written in, and without a lawful union, your stake means nothing." They left laughing, promising to return with more than words. That night, Leah sat by the fire, hands clenched. "They'll never stop. Even the reverend's against us. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here." Bear dropped a heavy hand on her shoulder, firm as stone. "Don't you let their lies become truth. You've held this place together since the day you walked in. Without you, it's just logs and mud. With you, it's home." Her eyes blurred with tears. She had always been the one overlooked, belittled, cast aside. Yet here, in this harsh valley, she had found someone who saw her strength clearer than she ever had. Still, a secret gnawed at her. She hadn't told Bear that Clyde, the drunken groom who had shamed her, had come to her sewing shop weeks before, warning that the railroad wanted Thunder Valley and would use any trick to seize it. She hadn't believed him then. Now his words echoed like prophecy. When she finally confessed, Bear didn't rage. He only nodded. "Then we'll need proof stronger than their lies. Somewhere out there is paper older than theirs, and we'll find it." And so began the perilous task of unearthing the past, of digging through Nia's chest of old treaties, of seeking witnesses willing to stand against money and fear. Laya knew the road ahead would be harder than any mountain climb, but for the first time she wasn't facing it alone. The railroad men returned on a moonless night, torches flickering like serpents in the dark. Their boots crunched against the frost as they circled the cabin, jeering. Jerome Willis's voice rose above the din. "Come out, McKenna! Hand over the woman and the land, and we'll let you leave with your hide intact." Laya's breath caught in her throat. Bear stood at the door, shotgun in hand, his shoulders broad enough to fill the frame. "This land's ours," he thundered, "and this woman is my wife. You'll have to come through me to take either." The men whooped, emboldened by numbers. One hurled a torch at the roof. It landed on the shingles, fire licking upward. Laya, without hesitation, grabbed a bucket and scrambled onto the porch. While Bear fired a warning shot into the air, she doused the flames, her skirt soaked, her arms trembling with effort. "Look at her," one man sneered, "big as a draft mule and just as stubborn." Laughter rippled, cruel and sharp, but Laya straightened, chest heaving, and shouted back. "Better a mule than a coward who hides behind lies." The insult stung them more than buckshot. Enraged, two men charged forward. Bear's shotgun roared, scattering them back, pellets biting into the dirt at their feet. The others hesitated, suddenly unsure. From the tree line, another voice rang out, steady, commanding. "Enough!" Nia emerged, holding aloft a bundle of documents bound in leather. Behind her strode Judge Whitmore, who had been visiting the mission that week. "These men stand on land protected by treaty, and I see no lawful order granting you otherwise." The crowd of hired guns faltered. Jerome Willis spat, but his bravado crumbled. "This ain't over," he snarled, backing away. Yet the sight of the judge, flanked by Nia and several townsfolk who had quietly followed, broke their courage. One by one, they slunk into the night, their torches dying in the snow. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire Bear had smothered with a blanket. Laya leaned against the porch post, soaked and shivering, but her chin lifted high. Bear lowered his weapon and turned to her. "You didn't flinch," he said softly. "I couldn't," she replied, her voice raw but steady. "This is our home." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers wrapping around hers. In that moment, before the judge, the neighbors, and the winter sky, their bond was sealed more firmly than any paper. The battle for Thunder Valley had been fought not only with bullets and fire, but with truth, courage, and a woman's refusal to bow her head. Snow fell softly over Thunder Valley, blanketing the scars of battle beneath a hush of white. Inside the cabin, the fire glowed bright, its warmth spilling into every corner. The roof still bore charred patches, the fences still leaned from where boots had trampled them, but the home stood, alive, enduring, a testament to their fight. Leah sat at the table, her hands busy stitching a quilt, while Bear repaired a broken chair beside her. The silence between them was no longer heavy, but easy, filled with the steady rhythm of two lives entwined. Bear set down his tools and studied her in the firelight. "You're safe here," he said quietly. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a vow. She met his gaze, her eyes shimmering. "And it feels like home, if you'll have me." He reached across the table, his scarred hand covering hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines, as if reminding them the world beyond was still harsh, still waiting to test them. Leah drew a steady breath, her voice a whisper. "Do you think love this strong can stand against all of it? The lies, the hatred, the railroad, the scorn?" Bear's grip tightened, his eyes holding hers with unwavering certainty. "It already has." The fire crackled, the storm outside raged, but within the cabin there was warmth, faith, and a question that lingered like a prayer. Would their love prove strong enough to defy the world? Stories like Leah's remind us that strength isn't measured by appearances, but by courage, kindness, and the will to stand firm when the world laughs. Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us, across distances, across languages, across hearts. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Share your corner of the world below, because your voice is part of this journey. And if you still believe in love that defies cruelty and triumphs over doubt, don't go anywhere. The next story is waiting for you.